The fluorescent lights hum above me like a swarm of dying insects, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional pale that makes healthy skin look sick and sick skin look dead. I count the ceiling tiles for the fourth time. 47. Still 47. My hands rest on my stomach, flat as ever at 6 weeks, betraying nothing of the chaos multiplying inside me. The waiting room smells of antiseptic and fear. That sharp chemical bite barely masking something more human underneath. I am Eleanor Bennett, 26 years old, $847 in my checking account, and I am here to make the only sensible decision available to a woman who cannot afford her own life, let alone another. The plastic chair cacks when I shift my weight. Around me, other women wait in their own private silences. Each of us islands in an archipelago of difficult choices. None of us make eye contact. That is the unspoken rule of places like this. I think of the stranger from my sister's wedding. The one with eyes like winter storms and hands that knew exactly where to touch. I think of champagne bubbles and bad decisions. And the way he whispered my name like it meant something. I think of waking up alone in that hotel room. The sheets still warm where he had been. I do not think of his face. I cannot afford to. Eleanor Bennett. The nurse's voice cuts through my spiral, and I stand on legs that feel borrowed from someone else. She is kind, this nurse, with gentle eyes and a clipboard full of forms I have already signed. The examination room is smaller than I expected. The ultrasound machine squatting in the corner like a mechanical prophet waiting to deliver its verdict. I lie back on the paper-covered table and stare at that ceiling. Different tiles now while cold gel spreads across my abdomen. The technician moves the wand with practiced efficiency. Her face professionally blank and then it changes. Her expression shifts into something I cannot read. Something that makes my blood run cold before she even speaks. She excuses herself, returns with a doctor. The doctor looks at the screen, looks at me, looks at the screen again. Miss Bennett, she says, and her voice carries the weight of world's ending. You are carrying triplets. The word does not make sense. I hear it, but my brain refuses to process the sound into meaning. 3 separate heartbeats flutter on the monitor. 3 tiny pulses of life where I expected one manageable problem. The room tilts. I grip the edges of the table as mathematics crashes through my mind. 3 cribs, 3 car seats, 3 college funds I will never afford. The impossibility of it threatens to swallow me whole. And then the door crashes open. Men in black suits pour into the corridor outside. Their voices sharp and commanding. I hear screaming from the waiting room. The clatter of chairs overturning. My name shouted like a weapon. The doctor's face goes white. I am moving before conscious thought catches up. Sliding off the table. Gel still wet on my skin. Ducking through a side door into a supply closet that smells of gauze and iodine. Through the crack in the door, I see them searching, methodical and relentless. And I hear one word repeated like a curse. Ravenscroft. The name means nothing. The name means everything. The name is the beginning of the end of the life I knew. Now, please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The supply closet window is smaller than I remembered windows being. A rectangle of grimy glass that protests with a shriek when I force it open. I squeeze through anyway, hips scraping against the frame, tumbling into an alley that stinks of rotting vegetables and desperation. My feet hit concrete and I run. I do not think about the 3 heartbeats inside me or the men with their dark suits and darker intentions. I think only of distance, of escape, of the 2 blocks between me and the bus station where I might disappear into the anonymous mass of city transit. I make it 1.5 blocks. The black car materializes like a predator from the shadows, sliding across the intersection to block my path with the silent certainty of something that has done this many times before. I spin to run the other direction, but there is another car there now, and men emerging from both with the calm efficiency of professionals who know their quarry has nowhere left to go. The one who reaches me first is tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that might be handsome if it ever learned to smile. Miss Bennett, he says, and his voice is terribly polite. I am Frederick Ashworth. You will come with us now. It is not a question. I consider screaming, but his hand is already on my elbow, guiding me toward the car with pressure that promises to become pain if I resist. The leather interior smells of money and menace. I count the minutes as the city falls away, replaced by winding roads and increasingly elaborate gates, until we arrive at an estate that belongs in a period drama, all stone walls and manicured grounds and the quiet threat of old wealth. Inside the hallways swallow sound. Frederick leads me to a study paneled in mahogany dark as dried blood. And there, behind a desk that costs more than my annual salary, sits the stranger from my sister's wedding. Except he is not the man I remember. That man laughed easily, touched gently, whispered poetry against my throat in a hotel room, gilded with champagne bubbles and possibility. This man is carved from ice and authority. His winter-torn eyes holding none of the warmth that once melted me. Alexander Ravenscroft. The name fits him now in a way the charming stranger never did. He knows. The words drop like stones into still water. About the pregnancy, about the triplets, about what you intended to do today. My hands move instinctively to my stomach, protecting what I had planned to eliminate mere hours ago. How could you possibly know that? He does not answer my question. Instead, he rises, circles the desk with the fluid grace of something dangerous, stops close enough that I can smell his cologne and remember exactly how it felt pressed against my skin. You will not be terminating this pregnancy, Eleanor. His voice is soft, certain, absolute. These children are Ravenscroft heirs. They will be born. They will be protected. And you will remain here until that happens. The room shrinks around me. I think of my tiny apartment with its leaking faucet and thin walls. Of my job processing other people's numbers. Of the life I was barely surviving. I think of 3 cribs I cannot afford becoming a gilded cage I cannot escape. What if I refuse? I ask, though I already know the answer. His smile is beautiful and terrible. A wolf baring its teeth. You will not, he says simply. And in his eyes, I see the death of every choice I thought I had left. The bedroom they install me in costs more than every apartment I have ever rented combined. A sprawling cage of silk sheets and velvet curtains and furniture that gleams with the particular arrogance of old money. I pace its perimeter like an animal learning the dimensions of her enclosure, trailing my fingers across surfaces too fine for hands that have scrubbed dishes and filed paperwork and clutched grocery coupons like lifelines. A maid brings dinner on a silver tray and will not meet my eyes. I demand to see Alexander. She scurries away without answering. Hours pass. I catalogue what I know. The man who touched me with champagne's sweet tenderness is actually Alexander Ravenscroft, head of something vast and criminal and terrifying. He knows about my $847 and my $3,200 in credit card debt. He knows about my mother who stopped calling after Dad left and my sister who married rich and forgot where she came from. He knows I am 6 weeks pregnant with his triplets. 3 impossible lives growing where I plan to have none. The power imbalance crushes my chest like a physical weight. This asymmetry of information that leaves me naked while he remains armored in secrets. When darkness falls, I try anyway. The window opens easily enough, but the drop is 2 stories, and I am thinking of the 3 heartbeats. So, I find the servants' staircase instead, creeping through shadows that smell of furniture polish and fear. The grounds stretch vast and moonlit, and I run toward the perimeter wall with my heart hammering against my ribs. Run until I reach the fence and the guards who materialize from nowhere and the hands that grip my arms with professional efficiency. They do not hurt me. They do not need to. The message is clear enough. Alexander finds me in the garden where they hold me waiting. Rain beginning to fall in silver sheets that plaster my hair to my face and soak through the borrowed silk of my borrowed clothes. His grip on my arm is iron and ice, but his eyes hold something that stops my breath, something beyond the anger I expected. Something that looks almost like fear. Do you have any idea? He says, and his voice is soft in that terrifying way that promises storms. What would happen if the wrong people learned you existed? If they knew what you carry? I try to twist free and fail. His fingers tighten. There are families who would slit your throat just to wound me. Organizations that would take you apart, piece by piece, to extract information you do not even possess. You are safest here behind these walls under my protection. I do not want your protection. I spit back. Rain running into my mouth, tasting of desperation. I want my life back. The life where I chose what happened to my own body. He leans close and I smell rain and cologne and danger. That life ended the moment you conceived my heirs, Eleanor. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. He releases me and walks away, leaving me shivering in the downpour. And I hate him with every fiber of my being. But beneath the hatred, something else stirs. A question. What is he so afraid of that he would cage me to keep me safe? I do not believe him. Not yet. Days blur into one another, marked only by the rhythm of meals I do not ask for. And the visits of a doctor whose gentle hands and careful questions cannot disguise the clinical surveillance beneath. Dr. Morrison arrives every third morning with her leather bag and her reassuring smile, pressing the cold ultrasound wand against my growing belly while I stare at the ceiling and try not to think about the 3 hearts beating inside me. The 3 lives I never planned for. The 3 chains binding me to this gilded prison. The East Wing becomes my kingdom and my cage. 7 rooms of impossible luxury, where I am free to wander but never to leave. Where every window shows me gardens I cannot walk without escort and walls too high to climb. I learn the household through whispers and fragments. The nervous glances of maids who straighten already straight pillows. The hushed conversations that stop when I enter rooms. They speak of Alexander in tones that blend fear and reverence, of enemies who questioned his authority and simply vanished, of a man who built an empire on the bones of those who crossed him. I should be terrified. I am terrified. But I also watch him with Frederick in the hallway outside my door. Their voices low and serious, and I see the way Frederick looks at him. Not with the cowering deference of a servant, but with the steady loyalty of a brother in arms. I catch Alexander watching me across the breakfast table. He has started joining. His winter eyes tracking my movements with an expression I cannot name. Something that shifts like clouds across a frozen lake when I meet his gaze directly. The contradiction of him haunts me. The ice and the intensity, the threats wrapped in silk provisions. On the 5th evening, nausea rises without warning. A violent wave that sends my fork clattering against fine china and my hand flying to my mouth. The room tilts and I grip the table edge, fighting the rebellion of my own body, humiliated by this weakness in front of him. Then he is there somehow already beside me, his hand warm on my back as he guides me to the settee by the window. Breathe, he says, and his voice is different now, stripped of command and authority, holding only quiet instruction. He brings water in a crystal glass and presses it into my trembling fingers. His hands linger on mine longer than necessary, steadying my grip, and when I look up, his face is close, and his eyes hold something that might be concern if I let myself believe such things. The gentleness unmoors me more than his cruelty ever did. I know how to fight a monster. I know how to hate a captor. But this man who commands death and brings me water, who cages me in luxury, and watches me with winter eyes that occasionally thaw, this contradiction I do not know how to survive. The nausea passes, but the unsettling warmth of his touch remains long after he withdraws. The library saves me. I find it on my 8th day of captivity, a vast cathedral of books hidden behind an unremarkable door in the East Wing corridor. And when I step inside, the smell of old paper and leather bindings wraps around me like the embrace of a long-lost friend. Thousands of volumes line walls that stretch toward a ceiling painted with faded constellations, and for the first time since the clinic, I feel something other than fear or fury. I lose myself in these shelves for hours each day, pulling down novels at random, letting fiction replace the unbearable weight of my reality. It is here that Alexander finds me at midnight, curled in a leather chair with a battered copy of Wuthering Heights, my eyes burning from reading by lamplight when sleep refuses to come. I do not hear him enter. I only look up and he is there standing in the doorway in shirt sleeves with his collar undone, looking almost human in the amber glow. looking almost like the stranger who made me laugh at my sister's wedding before he made me forget my own name. You could not sleep either, he says, and it is not a question. I set the book aside and watch him move to the sideboard where crystal decanters catch the light. Watch him pour whiskey with hands that seem steadier in this quiet hour than they do in daylight when he wears his authority like armor. He does not ask if I want a glass. He pours one anyway and brings it to me, then settles into the chair across from mine with a distance between us that feels both careful and charged. We sit in silence that stretches and somehow does not break. And when I finally speak, the question surprises us both. Why were you at my sister's wedding? His glass pauses halfway to his lips. A man named Castellano was in attendance. He had something I needed to acquire. I was there for business. He drinks, swallows, meets my eyes. Meeting you was not part of any plan, but he does not say he regretted it. The omission hangs between us, glittering and dangerous. My gaze drops to his hands wrapped around the crystal, and I see it again. The scar I noticed that first night, a circular mark on the back of his left hand that looks old and deliberate. I ask about it before I can stop myself. What happened to your hand? The thaw in his eyes freezes over instantly. Winter returning so fast I almost flinch. He stands, sets down his glass with a click that sounds like a door closing and leaves without another word. I sit alone in the library until dawn creeps through the windows, wondering what wound I touched, what monster made that mark on a child's hand. When I finally return to my room, exhausted and confused, I find it on my nightstand. A first edition of Jane Eyre, my favorite novel. The one I mentioned once to a stranger at a wedding. No note, none needed. The helicopter announces his arrival before I ever see his face. The rhythmic thunder of blades cutting through the afternoon stillness and drawing me to my window like a moth to dangerous flame. I watch the black machine descend onto the manicured lawn. Watch a figure emerge and stride toward the house with the easy confidence of someone who belongs here. And even from this distance, I can see he is nothing like Alexander. Where Alexander moves with controlled precision, this man practically dances across the grass, his gait loose and almost playful, his hand raised in greeting to the guards who nod but do not smile. Thomas Ravenscroft. I learn his name within the hour when he appears at my door without knocking. Leaning against the frame with a grin that shows too many teeth and eyes the same winter gray as his brothers. But somehow warmer, somehow more inviting. Somehow infinitely less trustworthy. So you're the woman carrying my nieces and nephews, he says, and his voice drips honey where Alexander's cuts ice. He invites himself into my sitting room, sprawls across my settee like a cat claiming territory, and proceeds to charm me with an ease that feels rehearsed. He asks about my comfort, my health, my happiness, and when I give guarded answers, he laughs as though my suspicion delights him. By dinner, I understand the dynamic. Thomas orbits his brother like a satellite, desperate to become a son. His compliments carrying edges, his jokes landing with the precision of small daggers. He flirts with me openly across the table, refilling my water glass before the servants can, asking my opinion on wines I've never tasted, letting his fingers brush mine when he passes the bread. Alexander's jaw tightens incrementally with each interaction, a muscle ticking beneath his skin, his winter eyes tracking his brother's movements with something colder than sibling rivalry. Afterward, Thomas finds me in the library, where I've retreated to escape the tension crackling through the dining room. He settles into the chair Alexander occupied just nights ago, and his presence there feels like a violation of something sacred. Though I cannot name what. You seem like a clever woman, Eleanor, he says, dropping the formal address his brother never abandons. Clever enough to want to know who you're really trapped with. He tells me then, his voice low and conspiratorial, intimate as a shared secret, their father. Alexander killed him, put a bullet in his chest, and stepped over the body to claim the empire. Thomas delivers this revelation like a gift. Watching my face for the horror he clearly expects. I give him nothing, but inside my blood runs cold as I remember Alexander's hands bringing me water, his unexplained scar, his shuttered silences. That night, I watch Alexander across the dinner table with new eyes, searching for the murderer in his careful movements, the patricide behind his controlled expressions. But I also watch Thomas watching him. And what I see there is not grief for a dead father. It is hunger, pure and patient and waiting. Something about this story doesn't fit. And I intend to find the missing pieces before they cut me. I find him in the moonlight garden, standing among the white roses that glow like ghosts in the darkness. And before I can lose my courage, I speak the words that have been burning in my throat since Thomas planted his poison. Your brother told me you killed your father. Alexander goes still, so completely motionless he might be carved from the same marble as the statues lining the garden path. And when he turns to face me, the moonlight catches his features and transforms them into something ancient and terrible. I should have known Thomas would not wait long. His voice carries no surprise, only a weariness that seems to age him a decade in an instant. I watch him, my heart pounding against my ribs, my hands pressed protectively over the slight swell of my belly where his children grow. And I wait because I need to hear his truth. Not his brother's version filtered through jealousy and ambition. He moves to a stone bench and sits heavily. And after a long moment, he gestures for me to join him, leaving careful distance between us that feels like an ocean. My father, he begins, and his voice cracks on the word before he masters it. My father was not a man who deserved that title. He was a monster, wearing expensive suits, attending charity galas, shaking hands with politicians while his family lived in terror behind closed doors. My mother learned to apply makeup to cover bruises. I learned to draw his attention away from her, away from Thomas, to make myself the target so they might be spared. He pauses, and in the silence I hear crickets singing, and somewhere distant, an owl calling, the peaceful sounds of night that seem obscene against the horror in his words. Thomas was 6 when our father died, Alexander continues. Too young to remember the nights our mother spent locked in the wine cellar for displeasing him. Too young to remember the doctor who came in secret to set her broken arm. He remembers only that his father smiled at him, brought him presents, called him his little prince. He does not know what that man truly was. Alexander lifts his scarred hand into the moonlight, and I see the circular mark clearly now, the deliberate cruelty of it. I was 7 years old. I spilled wine on the tablecloth during a dinner party. He held my hand down and pressed his cigarette into it while the guests pretended not to notice. That was the moment I knew that someday I would have to stop him or he would destroy us all. Tears burn my eyes as the pieces finally fit together. As the monster I feared reveals himself to be a boy who grew up in hell and found the only exit he could. When our mother was dying, Alexander says quietly, "She made me promise to protect Thomas. Even after everything, she wanted her sons to have each other. So I have kept his father's memory clean for him. Let him believe I am the villain because she asked me to." I reach across the distance between us and take his scarred hand in mine. He flinches at the contact, then holds on like I am the only solid thing in a world made of shadows. I do not forgive the danger that surrounds him. The empire built on violence. The cage he has made my home. But I understand now the boy who built those walls. And understanding changes everything. The weeks blur together like watercolors bleeding into one another. Each day adding new brush strokes to the portrait of my changing life within these walls. My body transforms in ways I never anticipated. My belly swelling with the weight of 3 lives. My breasts tender. My center of gravity shifting until I learn to walk differently, move differently, exist differently in this skin that no longer feels entirely my own. Alexander notices every change before I do. Appearing at my elbow when I reach for something on a high shelf, materializing beside me when I climb stairs too quickly and lose my breath. His hand finding the small of my back with an intimacy that has become as natural as breathing in twice as necessary. We take meals together now in the small breakfast room rather than the formal dining hall. The massive table replaced by something scaled for 2 people who have begun to orbit each other like binary stars. He tells me about his day in careful fragments. The parts that do not involve blood or threats or the violence that sustains his empire. And I share my own small discoveries from exploring the corners of the estate he has gradually unlocked for me. The gardens become our evening ritual. Slow walks along gravel paths while the sun paints the sky in shades of amber and rose. His arm offered for my balance. My fingers curling around his bicep and feeling the strength coiled beneath expensive fabric. I catch myself leaning into his warmth when the breeze carries autumn's first chill. Catch myself seeking his presence when I wake in the night with strange dreams. Catch myself wanting in ways that terrify me more than his world ever could. One night, I surface from a nightmare, gasping, reaching for something solid, and find him there in the chair beside my bed. His long body folded into the inadequate furniture. His head tilted at an angle that will leave him aching come morning. He sleeps, and in sleep the sharp edges of his face soften into something younger, something wounded, something achingly human. I watch him for longer than I should, tracing the shadows beneath his eyes with my gaze, memorizing the way his chest rises and falls, wondering when he came and how long he has kept this vigil. As if sensing my attention, his eyes open. Winter gray finding mine in the darkness. And neither of us speaks because words would shatter whatever fragile magic holds this moment suspended between heartbeats. The air between us thickens with everything unspoken, with the impossible trajectory that brought us from that wedding dance to this midnight communion. With the children growing beneath my heart, who will bind us together regardless of what we choose. I should look away. I cannot. He should leave. He does not. The tension that once tasted of fear has transformed into something richer and far more dangerous. Something that promises destruction or salvation in equal measure. And I am no longer certain which outcome frightens me more. Catherine Monteague arrives without warning on a Thursday morning. Her black sedan sweeping through the estate gates like a herald of winter despite the mild autumn sunshine. And I watch from my bedroom window as she emerges in a cloud of expensive perfume and cold elegance that I can sense even from this distance. She is beautiful in the way of women who have spent fortunes and decades cultivating their appearance. Her silver hair swept into a flawless shiny. Her charcoal suit cut to emphasize a figure that defies her years. Her face a masterwork of subtle enhancements that preserve rather than distort. Alexander meets her on the front steps. And even from here I can see the tension that locks his shoulders, the careful distance he maintains as she offers her cheek for a kiss. He barely brushes. I am summoned to the formal sitting room within the hour, presented like an exhibit at auction. While Catherine circles me with eyes the same gray as her son's, but lacking any of the warmth I have learned to find in Alexander's gaze. So this is the girl, she says, and her voice carries the particular contempt of old money addressing new nothing. She examines my swelling belly with the clinical interest of a farmer assessing livestock triplets. At least she is productive, if nothing else. I feel heat rise to my cheeks, but I hold my tongue, sensing that any response will only provide ammunition for whatever battle she has come to wage. Catherine settles into a wingback chair and gestures for me to sit opposite her, while Alexander remains standing by the fireplace, a sentinel whose allegiance I desperately hope lies with me. You understand, Catherine continues, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her skirt, that your role here is purely biological. The Ravenscroft line requires heirs, and you are providing them, for which you will be compensated generously. Once the children are born and weaned, arrangements will be made for your comfortable departure. The babies will remain here, of course. They are Ravenscroft's. My blood turns to ice water in my veins, and my hands move instinctively to cradle my belly, to shield the 3 lives within from this woman's monstrous assumptions. Before I can form words around my horror, Alexander speaks, and his voice carries an edge I have never heard directed at anyone but enemies. Eleanor stays. His mother's eyes narrow dangerously. Alexander, be reasonable. She is nobody. A bookkeeper with debts and a family that barely acknowledges her existence. The children need proper raising, proper education, proper connections, not some common girl playing house. Eleanor stays. Each word falls like a blade striking stone. She is not an incubator mother. She is not a convenience to be discarded. She is under my protection, which means she is beyond your reach, beyond your schemes, beyond your cold calculations about bloodlines and legacy. The children will know their mother. They will be raised by their mother. This is not a negotiation. The confrontation that follows shakes the walls of the ancient house, voices raised in fury, old wounds torn open and bleeding fresh. When Catherine finally retreats to her rooms, defeated but clearly not surrendered, Alexander finds me in the garden where I fled to escape the poison in the air. I am trembling despite the sunshine, arms wrapped around myself, tears streaming down my face at the thought of my babies taken from me. He cups my face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the tears, and his forehead comes to rest against mine in an intimacy that speaks louder than any declaration. No one will take your children, Eleanor. No one will force you from them. I swear it on my life. I believe him. God help me. I believe every word. The emerald silk slides over my skin like cool water as I stare at my reflection in the full-length mirror. Scarcely recognizing the woman who gazes back at me with wide eyes and flushed cheeks and a belly that swells beneath the flowing fabric like a promise made visible. Alexander sent the gown without explanation, delivered by a maid who laid it across my bed with reverent hands. And when I emerged from my room to find him waiting at the foot of the stairs, his expression stopped my breath in my throat. He looks at me now the way a man looks at something precious and fragile and desperately wanted. His winter gray eyes traveling from the loose waves of my hair to the subtle sparkle at my ears to the way the dress clings and flows and transforms me into someone who belongs in his world. You are stunning, he says, and the roughness in his voice tells me the words cost him something to speak aloud. The gala blazes with light and danger in equal measure. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across marble floors while men in tailored suits conduct conversations laden with threats beneath their pleasant smiles. I feel their eyes on me, assessing, calculating, wondering what hold this ordinary woman has on Alexander Ravenscroft, and whether that hold represents vulnerability to be exploited. His hand never leaves my back as he guides me through the glittering crowd, introducing me to names I recognize from whispered staff conversations as rivals and allies and enemies wearing friendship-like masks. A man approaches with silver hair and cold eyes. Victor Marchetti, and the questions he asks about my health and the pregnancy carry edges sharp enough to draw blood. Alexander's fingers tighten against my spine as Victor wonders aloud how difficult it must be carrying 3 children. So many things that could go wrong. Such a delicate situation. Before I can respond, Alexander is steering me toward the dance floor, pulling me into his arms with a possessiveness that should frighten me and instead makes me feel safer than I have felt since this nightmare began. We move together as if we have done this 1,000 times. His hands split across my lower back, my fingers curled against his shoulder. Our bodies close enough that I can feel his heart beating beneath the expensive fabric of his jacket. The music swells around us, and the dangerous room fades until there is only this, only him, only the impossible thing growing between us, like the children growing within me. Later, he leads me to a terrace where stars scatter across velvet darkness, and the autumn air carries the scent of dying roses from the gardens below. I am still catching my breath when he turns to me, cups my face in his hands, and looks at me with an expression that holds nothing back. No walls, no ice, no careful control. Eleanor, he breathes, and then his mouth finds mine, and the kiss is desperate and tender and inevitable all at once, tasting of champagne and longing, and the terrifying promise of surrender. I kiss him back with everything I cannot say. My fingers tangling in his hair, my body pressing against his, choosing this, choosing him, choosing the danger and the chaos, and the man who emerged from both. When we finally break apart, his forehead rests against mine. And we breathe each other's air, and I know that everything has changed. That there is no going back from this moment, that I have fallen irretrievably for a man I should fear, and instead cannot imagine living without. The morning after the gala, I drift through the estate in a haze of remembered kisses and impossible hope. My fingers straying to my lips as if I might still find the imprint of his mouth there. The taste of champagne and surrender lingering like a promise I am only beginning to understand. I round a corner in the West Wing, a section I rarely explore, and freeze at the sound of Thomas's voice carrying through a partially open door. Low and urgent and nothing like the charming drawl he wears like a costume in company. I press myself against the wall, heart suddenly pounding, and listen as he speaks into a phone with clipped precision. The shipment routes, yes, all of them. And the warehouse locations on the south side. I have the schedules for the next 3 weeks, enough to his operations entirely if your people move fast. A pause and then laughter that holds no warmth. Of course, the Marchetti family will have their revenge for last year. Consider this my gift, my down payment on our future arrangement. My blood turns to ice in my veins as I realize what I'm hearing. As the pieces click together with sickening clarity, Thomas selling his brother's secrets to the very man whose cold eyes assessed me at the gala like I was already a corpse. I must make some sound, some sharp intake of breath or rustle of fabric. Because suddenly the conversation stops and footsteps approach the door. And before I can flee, Thomas appears in the doorway with an expression that strips away every charming smile he has ever offered me. Well, he says, and his voice has changed, too. Harder and colder, and carrying an edge that reminds me suddenly of Alexander, but twisted wrong, corrupted into something purely cruel. Little Eleanor, playing spy. How unfortunate for you. He grabs my arm before I can run, fingers digging into flesh with bruising force, and drags me into the room where he ends his call with a curt word, and turns to face me with eyes that hold nothing but calculation. You should have stayed in your gilded cage, he says, circling me like a predator, assessing wounded prey. Those babies you carry, do you have any idea what they are worth? What leverage 3 Ravenscroft heirs represent? I have been waiting years for the right moment to take what should have been mine, and you have just delivered it wrapped in silk. I struggle against his grip, but I am 6 months pregnant, and he is strong. And when he shoves me through a hidden door and down stone stairs into a cellar that smells of dust and forgotten wine, I cannot stop my fall. Landing hard on my hands and knees as the door slams shut above me and a lock clicks into place with terrible finality. In the cold darkness, I wrap my arms around my belly where my children kick in protest. And I understand with crystalline horror that Thomas will not stop at betrayal. That he means to destroy his brother entirely, and that once Alexander is gone, there will be nothing standing between me and a man who sees my babies as nothing more than bargaining chips in his desperate grasp for power. The darkness presses against me like a living thing, cold and patient and hungry. But I refuse to let it swallow me whole. Refuse to let Thomas win while Alexander remains unaware of the knife poised at his back. My fingers find the hairpin still secured in my tangled hair, a remnant of the gala that feels like a lifetime ago. And I think of Jenny Martinez from my building growing up. The locksmith's daughter who taught me to pick locks when we were 14 because she thought it was a useful skill for girls who might need to escape bad situations someday. She had no idea how right she would prove to be. I worked the pin into the ancient lock with trembling hands, feeling for the mechanisms the way Jenny showed me. Ignoring the ache in my knees from my fall and the persistent flutter of panic in my chest where my babies shift and kick as if urging me onward. The click when it finally releases sounds impossibly loud in the silence. And I hold my breath for a long moment before pushing the door open inch by careful inch, peering into the dim passage beyond where dust motes float in slivers of light, filtering through cracks in the stone above. I move through the estate's underbelly like a ghost, one hand pressed to my belly and the other trailing along damp walls, pausing at every sound that might be footsteps. Every shadow that might conceal one of Thomas's men, waiting to drag me back into that tomb. The passages twist and branch in ways that make no sense. But I follow the faint current of fresher air, reasoning that it must lead somewhere inhabited, somewhere I might find help before Thomas realizes I have escaped. When I finally emerge through a hidden panel into a service corridor, I recognize I nearly weep with relief. But there is no time for tears, no time for the luxury of falling apart when Alexander's life hangs in the balance alongside my own. I find Frederick in the kitchen wing, his scarred face creasing with surprise and then sharp concern as I stumble toward him. Words spilling out in a desperate torrent about Thomas and the phone call and Marchetti and the shipment routes and the 3 weeks of schedules that will destroy everything Alexander has built. Frederick's expression hardens into something dangerous as I speak. And by the time I finish, he is already moving, gripping my elbow with surprising gentleness as he guides me through corridors I have never seen toward Alexander's study in the heart of the estate. The door opens, and Alexander looks up from his desk, and for one suspended moment, everything stops. His face cycling through confusion and relief and a fear so raw it steals the breath from my lungs. And then he is crossing the room in 3 strides. And his hands are cupping my face and his eyes are searching mine with an intensity that tells me everything words could never convey about what I have become to him in these impossible months. Alexander releases my face only to grip my hand, pulling me with him as he strides toward the main hall with Frederick flanking us and a cold fury radiating from every line of his body that makes even his own men shrink back against the walls as we pass. I should stay hidden, should let him handle this confrontation without the complication of my presence. But Frederick guides me up a servant staircase to the gallery overlooking the hall and positions himself beside me with one hand on my arm. A silent promise that I will watch but not interfere no matter how desperately I might want to. Below us, Thomas stands in the center of the marble floor with 4 of his men arranged behind him. His handsome face twisted into something ugly and triumphant as Alexander descends the main staircase alone. Each step measured and deliberate and radiating a menace that makes my breath catch in my throat. "So, the little mouse escaped her hole," Thomas calls out, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling with theatrical bravado that cannot quite mask the nervous energy beneath. "No matter, brother, the damage is already done. Marchetti knows everything. Your shipments, your warehouses, your precious schedules. By this time next month, the Ravenscroft empire will be nothing but ashes, and I will build something better from the ruins." Alexander reaches the bottom of the stairs and stops, his hands loose at his sides, his expression carved from stone. "You could have had everything," he says. And his voice is quiet, but it carries through the hall like a blade. "Money, position, a place at my side. I would have given you the world if you had only asked. But you chose betrayal instead. Chose to endanger the mother of my children. Chose to sell our blood to enemies who would destroy us all." Thomas laughs, a harsh, bitter sound. "Your children, always your children, your heirs, your legacy. What about what I deserve? What about the years I spent watching you take everything while I got nothing but scraps from your table? Father should have chosen me. Everyone knows it. And now I am simply correcting his mistake." He draws a gun from his jacket, the metal gleaming under the chandelier light, and aims it directly at Alexander's chest. Frederick's grip on my arm tightens to bruising as I surge forward instinctively, a cry strangling in my throat. But Alexander does not flinch, does not retreat, simply stands there with that terrible stillness while his brother's hand trembles around the trigger. "I am offering you one chance," Alexander says. "Leave the country tonight. Never return and I will let you live because despite everything, you are still my brother." Thomas's answer is to pull the trigger and the shot explodes through the hall. But the bullet goes wide, shattering a vase 3 feet to Alexander's left. And before Thomas can fire again, Frederick's men materialize from every doorway with weapons drawn, and Thomas's own guards drop their arms in immediate surrender. Thomas screams threats and promises of vengeance as they drag him away, his voice echoing long after he disappears from sight. Alexander looks up at the gallery where I stand with tears streaming down my face. And even from this distance, I can see that his hands are shaking, that the cost of mercy toward a brother who deserves none has carved something new and painful into his already wounded heart. The hours after Thomas is taken blur together in a haze of adrenaline crash and bone-deep exhaustion. And I find myself curled in the corner of a leather sofa in Alexander's study, watching him stare into the fireplace with a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, the flames casting shadows across features that seem carved from grief rather than flesh. He gave the order himself, exile rather than execution, a private plane to somewhere far enough that Thomas can never return. And I watched the conflict tear through him as he spoke the words that would spare the brother who tried to destroy everything he loves. "Blood is blood," he says finally, his voice rough and hollow. "Even when it poisons you, even when it tries to kill you, you cannot simply cut it out and pretend it was never part of you." I rise from the sofa and cross to him on unsteady legs, my body aching from the cellar and the escape and the terror of watching a gun aimed at his heart. And when I place my hand on his arm, he flinches like my touch burns before turning to face me with eyes that hold oceans of pain. He has never let anyone see. I killed my father to protect this family, he says. And the words sound like they are being torn from somewhere deep inside him. I have done terrible things to keep us safe, to build something that would last. And still it crumbles. Still the people who should stand beside me try to tear it all down. What is the point of power if everyone you love becomes your enemy? I cup his face in my hands the way he has done to me so many times, forcing him to meet my eyes. Not everyone, I tell him. Frederick would die for you. Your men respect you, and I am still here. I am not your enemy. I am not going anywhere. He makes a sound that might be a laugh or might be a sob. And then his arms are around me and his face is buried in my hair. And I am holding the most dangerous man I have ever known while he shakes apart in my embrace. I tell him about my father, then the man who walked out when I was 8 and never looked back. The birthday cards that stopped coming. The empty chair at every school play and graduation. I tell him about my mother who retreated into wine bottles and television static. Present in body, but absent in every way that mattered, leaving me to raise myself, while my perfect sister got scholarships and escaped to a better life. We are both survivors of families that failed us. Both terrified that we carry the same poison in our blood that will doom us to repeat the patterns we despise. Alexander's hand finds my belly where our children shift and kick. 3 lives that did not ask to be born into this chaos. And when he speaks, his voice is fierce with promise. I will be better, he swears against my skin. For them, for you, I will be everything my father never was. Catherine appears at breakfast 3 days after Thomas's exile, with a smile painted across her elegant features that does not reach her calculating eyes. And I watch her pour tea for Alexander with trembling hands that she attributes to grief over her youngest son, but that I recognize as barely contained rage simmering beneath her porcelain composure. She has been too quiet since the confrontation, too accommodating. And every instinct I have developed in these months of danger screams that her acquiescence is a performance designed to lull us into complacency. While she plots something far worse than pointed insults about my unsuitability as a Ravenscroft bride. I find the first clue by accident when retrieving a dropped napkin from beneath the dining room sideboard. My fingers brushing against paper that should not be there. A coded message written in elegant script that mentions coordinates and exchange points. And a name that makes my blood run cold. Marchetti. The same rival family that Thomas sold information to. The same enemies who would view my children as leverage and me as nothing more than an inconvenient vessel to be discarded once my usefulness ends. My hands shake as I piece together the fragments of Catherine Punk's betrayal. Her willingness to sacrifice her own grandchildren to install a leader she can manipulate. And I need to reach Alexander. Need to warn him that the danger has not passed, but merely shifted shape into something wearing a mother's face. Catherine intercepts me in the hallway outside Alexander's study with that same painted smile, her hand closing around my wrist with surprising strength for a woman who appears so fragile. You look pale, my dear, she says, and her voice drips with false concern. The doctor left your prenatal vitamins, and I do think you should take them now. Stress is so harmful for the babies. I try to pull away, but her grip tightens. And 2 of her personal staff materialize behind me with expressions that hold no kindness. And I realize too late that the trap has already closed around me. She presses a pill into my palm, watches with glittering eyes as her men ensure I swallow it. And within minutes, the world begins to blur at the edges. My limbs growing heavy, my thoughts scattering like startled birds. I call out for Alexander, but my voice emerges as barely a whisper. And the last thing I see before darkness claims me is Catherine's satisfied smile. The expression of a woman who believes she has finally won the game she has been playing since the moment she learned her son had chosen someone she deemed beneath the Ravenscroft name. I wake to the rumble of tires on rough road. My wrists bound with zip ties that bite into swollen skin. My body curled in the back seat of a vehicle I do not recognize with men I have never seen speaking in low voices about delivery points and payment schedules and what to do with the woman once the children are extracted. My babies kick frantically inside me as if they sense the danger we are hurtling toward. And I bite down on my terror until I taste blood, refusing to give these strangers the satisfaction of my screams while I desperately search for any path toward survival. Frederick finds Alexander in the study staring at the empty chair where Eleanor sat just hours ago reading aloud from a book of poetry while he pretended to work on accounts. And the moment Frederick speaks the words, she is gone. Alexander's entire body transforms from controlled stillness into something feral and desperate that Frederick has never witnessed in all their years together. Not when Alexander pulled the trigger on his own father. Not when Thomas betrayed everything, not even when rival families threatened war and destruction on everything the Ravenscroft name had built. Alexander tears through the estate like a hurricane given human form, interrogating staff with a voice that cuts like broken glass until a trembling maid confesses she saw Catherine's personal guards escorting Eleanor toward the service entrance. Saw Eleanor stumbling as if her legs would not obey her. Saw the black vehicle waiting with its engine running and its windows dark as secrets. The cold calculation that has made Alexander legendary in the criminal underworld shatters completely when he finds the coded message Eleanor had discovered still clutched in her abandoned cardigan. The evidence of his mother's treachery spelled out in elegant handwriting that he recognizes from birthday cards and formal correspondence. And the note she left when she abandoned him to his father's brutality at age 12 to preserve her own comfort. He calls in every favor accumulated over a decade of ruthless empire building. Threatens contacts who have never heard fear in his voice before. Sends his men spreading across the city, like a net drawing tighter around the Marchetti family's known locations, while he paces his study like a caged predator, counting the minutes that Eleanor remains in the hands of people who view her as nothing more than a vessel to be emptied and discarded. Frederick stands in the doorway, watching his boss and oldest friend unravel, and finally speaks the question that hangs between them. "What is she to you?" he asks. And Alexander stops pacing and the answer that emerges sounds like it is being torn from somewhere deep in his chest where he has locked away every vulnerable thing since childhood. "I love her," Alexander says, and the words hang in the air like a confession and a revelation and a battle cry all at once. "Not just because she carries my children. Not just because she is brave and fierce and sees through every wall I have built. I love her, Eleanor. The woman who fights me and challenges me and makes me want to be worthy of something beyond power and fear." Frederick nods once and doubles his efforts on the communication channels while Alexander loads weapons with hands that shake with rage rather than fear. And within 4 hours, they have a location, a warehouse on the eastern docks controlled by Marchetti soldiers who have no idea what is coming for them. Frederick offers to lead the assault team, but Alexander refuses because this is personal. This is everything. This is the woman he loves and the children she carries and the future he never believed he deserved until she looked at him like he was more than a monster. He goes himself into the darkness, leaving Frederick in command of the empire that suddenly means nothing compared to one woman's safety. And the night swallows him whole as he drives toward either salvation or destruction, with Eleanor's name burning like fire in his chest. The warehouse smells of rust and cedar, and the particular staleness of spaces where desperate deals are made in shadows. And I count 6 men through my half-closed eyes while I pretend to still be unconscious. Their voices carrying across the concrete floor, as they debate my worth in terms that reduce me to nothing more than a container for valuable cargo that they have not yet decided how to extract. My wrists burn where the zip ties have cut into flesh, swollen from hours of restricted circulation. And my babies shift restlessly inside me as if they sense the danger pressing in from every direction. 3 small lives depending on me to find a way out of this nightmare that Catherine Monteague delivered us into with her painted smile and poison vitamins. The men argue about timelines and payments and whether the Ravenscroft heir situation is worth the inevitable retaliation. And I file away every detail, every name, every scrap of information that might help me survive the next hour because survival is all I can focus on when the alternative is unthinkable. Then the first gunshot shatters the stale air and everything erupts into chaos. Men scrambling for weapons and cover while more shots crack through the night in a rhythm I recognize somehow in my bones as rescue rather than rival assault. And I curl myself smaller around my belly and pray to whatever forces govern the universe of dangerous men and the women foolish enough to love them. The warehouse door explodes inward and Alexander comes through like wrath given human form. His movements precise and lethal in ways I have never witnessed, but always sensed lurking beneath his controlled exterior. And he cuts through the Marchetti soldiers with an efficiency that should terrify me, but instead floods my chest with desperate relief because he came. He found me. He is here. 2 men fall before they can raise their weapons. And a third drops when Alexander's bullet finds him mid-stride and the remaining guards scatter like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Their loyalty to the Marchetti family evaporating in the face of a predator who has nothing left to lose. Alexander reaches me in 4 strides and his hands are slick with blood when they cut my face. But his touch is so gentle it breaks something open in my chest and his voice cracks on my name. Eleanor, are you hurt? The babies tell me. I am okay. I manage through the tears. I cannot stop. We are okay. And his forehead drops to mine for one shuddering breath before he produces a knife and slices through my bonds with hands that tremble despite their deadly skill. He lifts me like I weigh nothing, cradles me against his chest with my arms locked around his neck, and carries me out of that warehouse over the bodies of men who would have sold me and stolen my children and never thought twice about either crime. I do not look back at the carnage. I look only at Alexander's face, at the tears he does not bother to hide, at the love I can finally see written in every desperate line of his expression, and I know with perfect certainty that I will never doubt his devotion again. The estate wraps around me like a sanctuary I never expected to need. And the doctor finishes examining me with gentle hands and reassuring words about the babies being strong and healthy despite everything their mother endured in that warehouse. And Alexander hovers in the doorway, watching every movement with eyes that have not left my face since he carried me out of that nightmare and into the car and up the stairs and into this bed where I finally feel safe enough to breathe. Frederick reports that Catherine has been located attempting to flee the country with funds she embezzled from family accounts. And Alexander's jaw tightens at the mention of his mother. But his attention remains fixed on me as if I might disappear again if he looks away for even a moment. The house feels different now, cleaner somehow. The shadows that lurked in corners dispersed by the removal of those who wished me harm. And when the doctor finally leaves and the guards resume their posts and the night settles into quiet around us, Alexander sits on the edge of my bed and takes my hand in both of his and speaks words I never expected to hear from a man who built an empire on control and power and never showing weakness. I am giving you a choice, he says, and his voice breaks on the word in a way that tells me how much this offer costs him. I can set you up somewhere safe, anywhere in the world you want to go. A home and security and everything you and the children will ever need. And I will never contact you, never intrude on your life, never ask for anything except occasional photographs, so I know they are growing and healthy and happy. His hands tremble around mine and I see the effort it takes for him to continue to offer me the freedom he once refused to give me, the choice that should have been mine from the beginning. You deserve a life without danger. He says, without enemies who would use you to hurt me, without the weight of what I am and what I have done pressing down on every moment of every day. And I love you too much to trap you in a cage just because I cannot bear to let you go. The word love hangs between us like something fragile and precious. And I look at this man who killed for me, who cried for me, who is breaking his own heart to give me wings. And I know with absolute certainty what my answer will be. I pull my hand from his grip and cup his face instead. Feel the stubble rough against my palms and the dampness on his cheeks that he cannot hide. And I kiss him with everything I have. Every fear transformed into faith. Every doubt dissolved into devotion. Every moment of our impossible journey leading to this single perfect choice. I choose you. I whisper against his lips. I choose the danger and the empire and the complicated, terrible, beautiful life. I choose you, Alexander, not because you are safe, but because you are mine. He holds me like I am everything. And I know that I am. And Catherine will be exiled like Thomas before her. And the old guard will be cleared away. And something new will rise from the ashes of everything that tried to destroy us. The pain comes 4 weeks early, and it comes like a storm. crashing through my body at 3 o'clock in the morning with a ferocity that rips me from sleep and leaves me gasping Alexander's name into the darkness of our bedroom. And he is awake and moving before the echo fades, his hand finding the light switch while his eyes find my face. And I see the moment he understands what is happening, the moment fear floods those features I have learned to love in all their sharp and shadowed planes. The drive to the private hospital passes in a blur of contractions that steal my breath. And Alexander's voice in my ear, telling me to squeeze his hand, to breathe, to hold on. And I grip his fingers so hard I must be hurting him. But he never flinches, never looks away, never stops murmuring words of love and encouragement that anchor me through each wave of pain that threatens to pull me under. The delivery room is bright and sterile and full of masked faces speaking in calm, professional tones that do nothing to ease the terror clawing at my chest. Because triplets are dangerous, early triplets are more dangerous. And when the monitors start beeping their warnings during the 8th hour, I see Alexander's face go white in a way I have never witnessed from a man who has faced down bullets and betrayal without blinking. The doctors move faster and their voices sharpen, and someone mentions emergency procedures, and Alexander's hand crushes mine as he leans close and tells me I am the strongest person he has ever known. That I can do this, that our children need their mother and he needs me, and I am not allowed to leave him now. Not after everything we have survived to reach this moment. I focus on his eyes, those gray depths that once seemed so cold and now burn with desperate love. And I push through the pain and the fear and the exhaustion that has turned my muscles to water. Because he is right. Because I did not survive Thomas and Catherine and warehouses full of men who wanted me dead just to fail now in this bright room surrounded by people trying to help me bring life into the world. The first cry splits the air at hour 16 and something in my chest cracks open. And the second follows 12 minutes later. And the third comes after complications that add another 2 hours of terror before finally a tiny wail announces that all 3 of my children have arrived. Screaming their protest at being evicted from their warm, dark home. 2 boys and a girl, the doctor announces. And I am crying so hard I can barely see them when the nurses place the first warm bundle against my chest. But I feel them. Feel the impossible miracle of their weight and their warmth and their furious little heartbeats pounding against my skin. Alexander kisses my forehead with trembling lips and then kisses each tiny forehead in turn. And when I look at his face, I see tears streaming down his cheeks in silver tracks. He makes no effort to hide. And this man who commands an empire and inspires terror in his enemies is weeping openly at the sight of his children. Our children. This family we built from chaos and danger and one accidental night that changed everything forever. Perfect. He whispers against my hair. They are perfect. You are perfect. Everything is perfect. And I believe him because in this moment holding our babies while he holds us all, perfection is the only word that fits. The nursery is chaos in the best way. Toys scattered across the plush. Carpet like colorful landmines and the mobile. Above the crib spinning lazy circles. While 3 sets of lungs compete to see who can shriek loudest in what I have learned to interpret as pure, unbridled joy rather than distress. And I lean against the doorframe with my coffee growing cold in my hands, watching the most feared man in the city, lying flat on his back, while James gnaws on his finger. And William attempts to climb his chest. And Charlotte sits on his stomach, babbling in the secret language she has invented that somehow makes her father respond as if he understands every syllable. 6 months since they arrived, screaming into this world. 6 months of sleepless nights and endless feedings and more happiness than I ever thought possible for a woman who once sat in a clinic waiting room convinced she had no future worth building. And Alexander Ravenscroft, the head of the Ravenscroft Syndicate, the man whose name makes grown men tremble, is currently making a sound like a dying whale because Charlotte finds it hilarious. And her giggle is apparently worth any sacrifice of dignity. He catches me watching, and the smile that breaks across his face is the rare and real one. The one that erases the sharp edges and the shadows, the one I have learned to treasure above diamonds and silk, and all the luxuries his world provides. Because this smile is mine alone, earned through blood and terror, and choices made in the dark, when easier paths beckoned. Frederick appears behind me with reports that need signing and threats that need addressing because the Empire does not pause for fatherhood. But Alexander waves him away without looking up because William has just discovered how to grab hair and the resulting tangle requires immediate diplomatic intervention. Later, when the chaos subsides and 3 milk-drunk babies sleep in their cribs with their tiny fists curled and their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm, Alexander finds me in the sitting room watching the city. Lights glitter beyond the window like scattered jewels, and he sits beside me and takes my hand and produces from his pocket a ring that catches the lamplight and fractures it into rainbows across the walls. Not a demand this time, not a command or a requirement or a condition of my continued safety, but a question in his eyes that holds more vulnerability than I ever saw during gunfights and betrayals and all the violence that brought us to this moment. "Will you?" he begins. And I say yes before he can finish. Because I have been saying yes to him in 1,000 small ways every day since I chose to stay. Since I chose him over safety and love over logic and this terrifying beautiful life over the ordinary one I once thought I wanted. He slides the ring onto my finger and kisses me soft and deep and full of promise. And outside the window the city sprawls with all its dangers and enemies and complications. But inside this room there is only us, only love hard won and freely given. Only the family we built from one accidental night at a wedding where I met a stranger who became my captor, who became my protector, who became my everything. I went to that clinic to end an unexpected pregnancy and instead found an unexpected life, chose it, fought for it, nearly died for it, and I would do it all again without hesitation because this is where I belong. Here in the chaos and the danger and the overwhelming love with him, with them forever and always.